All these years, evolutionists have appealed to feathered dinosaurs as the best evidence for bird evolution. If it is true that there are feathered dinosaurs, we should find many examples of creatures that have bird-only and dinosaur-only features all in one creature. And we don't find any of that. There are no feathered dinosaurs. And remember, if there's no feathered dinosaurs, there's no evolution.
Well, hi there. My name is Clint LOVES. I have a master's and a PhD in biology with a research focus in evolutionary biology and evolution education. And those were some pretty bold claims. I do like his assessment, though, that if it is true that there are feathered dinosaurs, we should find many examples of creatures that have bird-only and dinosaur-only features all in one creature. But I'm a bit surprised by his claim that we don't find any of that, and there are no feathered dinosaurs. So I'm interested to see what he has to say.
The idea that dinosaurs had feathers is nearly universally believed because that's what we see in movies like Jurassic World and even in some science museums. But that's not what you think, Joel. You have a degree in evolutionary biology, and you've actually written quite extensively on dinosaurs in your book, Titans. So tell us why you don't think that dinosaurs evolved and that they had feathers.
Okay, so she starts off by saying that the idea that dinosaurs had feathers is almost universally believed because that's what we see in the movies like Jurassic World and in some science museums. But I find that to be a rather odd claim. I guess it's probably true that among members of the general public, these are probably the reasons that a person would think that dinosaurs had feathers. But of course, that isn't the reason that the scientific community thinks that many dinosaurs had feathers. And it is because the scientific community thinks that there's considerable observable evidence that many dinosaurs had feathers, that feathered dinosaurs show up in modern movies and in museums. So those things might be the proximate cause for acceptance among the general population, but they aren't the ultimate cause. And I imagine, or at least I hope, that we're going to discuss the ultimate cause in some detail over the course of this video. But let's see what he has to say.
That's excellent. In fact, that's one of the questions we get a lot, all the time. Are birds dinosaurs? And I do not believe that is so.
Okay, so he says, are birds dinosaurs? And then he concludes, I do not believe it is so. I always find that so odd. In our first video reacting to creationist arguments, we discussed a steel man for the creationist position. Honestly, many creationists have incorporated many of the most irrefutable parts of evolutionary biology into their creation model. A creationist position that is difficult to fully refute is possible to articulate. And one concept that they often reference is the concept of created kinds. Created kinds being lineages of organisms that are all related to one another and that they share common ancestors, but that are not related to any other lineage of organisms alive today or ever. Members of created kinds can be verified to be members of the same kind if they have some degree of reproductive compatibility. Though lack of reproductive compatibility does not confirm absolutely that they are not members of the same kind. Anyway, that is a pretty core position of well-informed creationists. And I have never heard them call all dinosaurs the same kind. Kind is usually understood to be roughly equivalent to a Linnaean family. And there exist way more than one family of known dinosaurs. They don't think that T-Rex and Triceratops were the same kind, but they're okay with grouping together similar, but as they believe unrelated groups of organisms. For example, they don't think that all 250 or so bird families are the same kind, but they're okay with calling them all birds. They also think that non-avian dinosaurs lived just a few thousand years ago alongside birds, humans, and all of the other kinds. And if they're okay with Triceratops, Stegosaurus, Velociraptor, Brachiosaurus, Iguanodon, and Tyrannosaurus being dinosaurs, why not consider birds to be dinosaurs as well? They wouldn't think that all of the birds are related by ancestry to one another, let alone to the other dinosaurs, but I don't see why they can't just accept them as being part of this meaningless dinosaur group that they already accept. But they choose to have this fight, so let's see if we can find out why. Have you ever noticed how some of the most fascinating stories about science or nature can get completely lost in sensational headlines? Or worse, misrepresented. It happens more often than you think, especially with complex topics like what we sometimes cover on our channel. That's one of the reasons that I love Ground News, the sponsor of today's video. Ground News is more than just a news app and website. It's a way to see the world through every angle. Created by a former NASA engineer, it pulls together stories from across the globe and lays out all the key details, like political bias, factual reliability, and ownership, so you can make up your own mind about what's really going on. Take this wild story. 43 monkeys escaped from a research lab in South Carolina. One headline says, "Police assure there's no danger." Pretty calm, right? But another one boldly declares, "Welcome to Planet of the Apes." Two totally different takes on the same event. This is why it's important to not rely on just one source. With Ground News, it's easy to compare these perspectives side by side and cut through the noise. One of my favorite features is the blind spot feed. It's like a spotlight for disproportionately reported stories. Things you'd probably miss if you're only hearing from one side of the media spectrum. Breaking out of those bubbles feels so refreshing, and it's one of the reasons that I keep coming back to Ground News. This is honestly the tool that I wished existed for so long, but now it does. And here's the best part. Ground News is having their biggest sale of the year. 50% off their Vantage plan, whether it's for yourself or a gift. This unlocks every feature, including unlimited access to the blind spot feed. If you care about getting a clear and complete picture of the world, go to ground.news/Clint. Scan the QR code or click the link down in the description to check it out. Just like we explore the natural world right here together, Ground News helps us explore the media world with clarity and curiosity. I think they're doing incredible work. I hope you give them a try.
But before we can address that question, we need to answer another more important question. We need to define what is a dinosaur.
This is great, and something that I find that creationists are often reluctant to do. It's really fine to use terms in novel ways, but if you're going to do so, you need to define your terms. Otherwise, you aren't even speaking the same language.
So a dinosaur is simply a reptile that walks on land in an upright position.
Okay, so a dinosaur is a reptile that walks on land in an upright position. And that's not a bad definition. Of course, we do need to follow up with, like, what is a reptile? Because birds, for example, are in the clade reptilia, and they walk in an upright position. So, I mean, for starters, like, how upright are we talking? And also, I should add, by this definition, things like snapping turtles and mini crocodilians would be dinosaurs. So we might need to clarify a little more.
What do you mean by walks upright? What about Triceratops or some of the long-necked dinosaurs? Don't they walk upright?
Okay, so this is a good clarification. I still need to know what a reptile is, though.
Yeah, they walk on four legs, but those creatures still walk in an upright position. And what do I mean by that? Is that dinosaurs have a very unique anatomy where the limbs grow down straight and they walk upright. So if you think about the way that a crocodile walks, the arm kind of sprawls out from the side and it kind of walks in a waddle in that position. Dinosaurs is different because they have a unique anatomy that allows them to walk upright. The legs go straight down.
I think that I know what he's getting at, but he really hasn't explained it very well, at least to this point. And we do really need for him to define what he means by a reptile, if we're going to assess whether or not birds fit this definition.
What you're saying is that they have a completely different skeletal system between a dinosaur and other reptiles.
That's right, and the skeleton actually comes down to the hip socket. So if you think about our hip socket, you have this picture in your mind of like a cup and a ball for your hip socket. With dinosaurs, it's different. Dinosaurs have a very unique hip socket. It's what we call a perforated acetabulum. That's just a fancy way of saying an open hip socket. So in dinosaurs, you have three bones that come together to form a hole. And so here you have the hole there. And then you have the femur, the thigh bone. And in dinosaurs, the head of the thigh bone, the joint, the hip joint, sticks out perpendicular and it fits into this hole. And now the creature walks in an upright position. So that's why it's different from a crocodile, and that's why crocodiles are not lizards.
This was going in a really good direction. She had asked a good question, and he just did a great job of explaining what is really unique about the dinosaur pelvic anatomy that differentiates crocodilians and snapping turtles from dinosaurs. Though it has nothing to do with the reason that crocodiles are not lizards. I think he probably meant to say dinosaurs.
In crocodiles, they don't have the completely open acetabulum.
Yeah, okay, so I think he meant that this is why crocodiles are not dinosaurs. And I'll explain this in a little more detail because I knew for maybe a decade that something about the dinosaur hip morphology was unique before I was finally able to figure out what the difference was. So there are 3 bones that come together to form the dinosaur pelvis: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. Now this is not a difference between the dinosaur pelvis and the crocodilian pelvis. The crocodilian pelvis has the same 3 bones that come together in much the same way. This is actually something shared pretty much across the tetrapods. So basically all land vertebrates have these same 3 bones. The socket into which the femoral heads fit is called an acetabulum. The difference between crocodilians and dinosaurs is that in dinosaurs, there is no bony back to the acetabulum. Where the 3 bones come together, there's just a hole called a perforated acetabulum. And while there was likely a soft tissue membrane between them, if you look at just the bones, the 2 femoral heads can look at one another through the perforated acetabulum. And this is the case for all dinosaurs except for the ankylosaurs, which have a secondarily filled in acetabulum. It is possible to lose a defining feature for a group, so this doesn't cause them to no longer be dinosaurs, but this is a unique feature shared by almost all dinosaurs. And the only animals alive today with a perforated acetabulum like this are birds. It'll be interesting to see if he brings that up and what he chooses to make of that.
So that means that crocodiles are not dinosaurs because they have this different hip socket.
That's right. And so this special hip socket, the open acetabulum, is only unique to dinosaurs. And that's why crocodiles are not dinosaurs.
Now, I would say that crocodiles are not dinosaurs because they do not share the last common ancestors that all dinosaurs share with one another. They aren't dinosaurs because they have a different ancestry. But I think his definition is that a dinosaur is a reptile, which we still need to define, that walks on land in an upright position with a perforated acetabulum. So I don't know if he rejects ankylosaurs as dinosaurs, but I haven't yet seen a clear reason why birds would not be dinosaurs.
Using this definition that you just talked about, the open hip socket, that means that a bird is not a dinosaur then. Is that correct?
This is almost a great question, but it assumes that birds are not dinosaurs, and he hasn't yet explained why this would be the case. What she needs to ask is, okay, then based on your definition, why would birds not be dinosaurs? But let's see what he has to say.
Exactly, because birds, they have a closed hip socket, a closed acetabulum.
No, they don't. As I explained before, there is a soft tissue membrane between the femoral heads, as there likely was with other dinosaurs, but skeletally, they have a fully perforated acetabulum, just like most of the other dinosaurs. So I don't know what he's talking about.
And in some of the extinct birds, you do have a partially open acetabulum. So what does that mean? If you think sometimes you have a little well, and at the bottom of the well, there's a small hole. But that's very different from a dinosaur which has a completely open hip socket.
Okay, so that was just false. In all dinosaurs with a perforated acetabulum, the perforated acetabulum formed by a secondary loss of cartilage in the acetabulum during embryonic development, which is why it could form to a lesser degree in groups like the Herrerasaurs and especially in the ankylosaurs. And it forms in the same way in modern birds. And, as was the case with the Mesozoic dinosaurs, it sometimes forms to a greater or lesser extent. But saying that birds have a closed acetabulum, that's just false. It could be ignorance, but if not, this was just a lie to cover a very inconvenient truth if one is attempting to make a case that birds are not dinosaurs. Which again, I don't even think needs to be made.
If birds are not dinosaurs because they have a different hip socket, is there another way that would allow us to distinguish them from a dinosaur?
All right, so that is a very good question, assuming that you don't know what he just said was inaccurate. And I don't think she does.
Well, there are many ways. But first, you must be wondering, if they're so different in the hip socket, then why is it that evolutionists say that birds are dinosaurs?
This seems disingenuous to me. The if here is false. So changing her very reasonable question to this if-then question seems very questionable. But let's see what he has to say.
And that's because they actually use a different definition. So the traditional definition was the same thing that I told you. A dinosaur is a reptile that walks upright on land. But evolution, they believed in common ancestry of all things. So everything evolved from a common source. So in the evolutionary model, you normally have an evolutionary tree, right? And in the evolution model, from dinosaurs, it evolved into the modern birds that we see today. And that's why the modern birds in that tree nest within what we would call Dinosauria or dinosaurs. So in the model, look, hey, birds are within Dinosauria. They are dinosaurs. But that's a very different definition from the definition that we gave earlier on.
Okay, so he did not answer her question at all. Yes, our models depict birds evolving from within the Dinosauria, but she was asking why we would think that this was the case. And he didn't offer a single reason. And there are many. I'll list several at the end of this video if they don't come up along the way. But he was wrong about the hip structure of birds. So by his definition, especially given that he has never said anything about not considering birds to be reptiles or why they should not be considered reptiles, birds would be dinosaurs. And yes, we think that birds are nested within the Dinosauria, but there are reasons for that. She was asking for them, and he didn't list a single one.
So what else would allow us to say that that's a dinosaur, that's a bird?
I'm really glad that she's asking a follow-up here.
Dinosaurs, if you think about the way they are, see, evolutionists believe that the theropod dinosaurs, most evolutionists believe that the theropod dinosaurs continue to evolve into the modern birds that we see today. But if you think about the theropod dinosaurs, these are the ones with the big legs and small arms. They really have the wrong kind of anatomy to turn into a modern bird.
Just for the record, while some theropod lineages like the Tyrannosaurids and the Carcharodontosaurids had large heads and thus small arms, that was not ubiquitous across the theropods. The group from which birds appear to have evolved are the Maniraptora, the hand thieves, because they had large, well-developed arms. Heck, Therizinosaurus was part of the Maniraptora. You can't call those small arms.
So when you think about a dinosaur tail, you think of this huge, muscular, yet flexible tail. And when you look at the bones of this tail, they are huge. They have all these spiky, bony projections. Those are muscle attachment sites.
Yeah, this is true. Dinosaurs usually had large muscular tails.
That's a dinosaur tail.
How does that differ from a bird's tail?
Again, I'm really thankful that she's asking some follow-up questions because he is a master of not answering her.
Well, birds, most modern birds don't have much of a tail. They have a very short tail. And when you look at their anatomy, at the end of the tail, you have maybe 4 to 9 vertebrae, and then you have a pygostyle. And so what's that? This is the cap or the end of the tail. And this end of the tail is normally just a few bones that are fused together. So they are inflexible, they're very thin. Again, very different from a dinosaur tail. And they're just there. So they're not flexible and they're thin. There are not many muscle attachment sites.
This is all true.
Now, what's interesting in some of these extinct birds, like Archaeopteryx.
Okay, so this is really interesting. He's already accepting that Archaeopteryx is a bird. Let's see where he's going with that, because Archaeopteryx does not have a tail like the bird tail that he just described. In fact, it's different from all modern birds in many ways. And most, if not all of the ways that it's different are ways that make it more similar to the other Maniraptoran dinosaurs than it is to modern birds.
They have a tail, but the tail is very much a bird configuration.
I don't know what he's talking about. The tail of Archaeopteryx, it's nothing like the tail of a modern bird. He did such a great job of explaining the bird tail, and the tail of Archaeopteryx was absolutely nothing like that. It was long and thin and not fused into a pygostyle. Look at it next to a bird tail. No birds have tails anything like that. Does he think that we don't have eyes? That looks nothing like a bird tail. You know what does have a tail like that? Other Maniraptoran dinosaurs. Oh boy.
just talking about how there's a distinction in dinosaurs and birds based on their tail. What other differences might they have?
I am so glad that she keeps pushing him on this. So far, the differences that he has listed are that they don't have a perforated acetabulum, even though they do, and they don't have a long, skinny, unfused tail, unless they do. So I would say that so far, he has not been able to list a single difference. And the reality is that I could. Birds are unique from other dinosaurs, just like ceratopsians are unique from other dinosaurs. There are unique features, but so far, assuming especially that he has concluded that Archaeopteryx is a bird and not a dinosaur, he hasn't been able to come up with even one. I still don't know why creationists need birds to not be dinosaurs, but you're definitely making your path even harder if you need Archaeopteryx to not be a dinosaur either. Oh boy. Honestly, I think I could make this case better. Maybe they should have me on their show. This feels more like a who would win book than a creationist video. But, alright, let's see what he has to say.
So we have looked at individual traits so far, especially skeletal differences. So we have looked at the hip socket, we have looked at the tail, but we can look at their soft tissue, look at the body plan, the way that this creature moves, the way that they breathe and things like that. And some of these things are not very well preserved in the fossil record. But we can look at creatures and say, hey, look, that's a reptile, this is a bird.
Okay, I'm excited about this because we're finally getting to the reptile versus bird question.
What are the differences? Because if it's really different, then it doesn't make sense for you to group these two creatures into one. And so the concept that I would like to bring up is this idea of an integrated biological system.
What do you mean by that?
Well, one example, think about the way that a reptile breathes. So a reptile, the lungs, we are mammals, but they have very similar lungs in the sense that the lungs expands, it contracts. It has a diaphragm that controls that breathing. The air goes in and out in most cases. So that is a reptile lung. Okay,
so he officially has no idea what he's talking about. I think we need to talk quite a bit about lungs. And this is just as well, I've been promising to explain these for years, and now seems like as good a time as any. So his description of lungs is pretty accurate for mammals. Mammals have a blind sac lung, meaning that air must enter and exit the same way. Air is brought into the lungs using negative pressure. The diaphragm is a muscle that separates the abdominal cavity from the chest cavity, and when contracted, it pulls down on the chest cavity, increasing the volume of the lungs, and thus generating a vacuum that pulls air into them from the outside. When it relaxes, the chest cavity shrinks and forces air out of the lungs. Not all of the air, but some of it. So that's how respiration works in mammals, which he explains in response to the question of how reptiles breathe. The problem is that this isn't how reptiles breathe, and not all reptiles breathe in the same way. For example, lepidosaurs like tuataras and lizards do not have a diaphragm. They use the intercostal muscles of their chest wall to ventilate their lungs. These are the same muscles that they use to run, which is why most of them cannot run and breathe at the same time. Turtles do not really have these muscles, so they use muscles attached to their pelvic and pectoral girdles that are uniquely situated inside of their rib cage, unlike in all other vertebrates. Crocodilians kind of do both of these things, as well as use diaphragmatic muscles to move their visceral masses, their organs, to expand and contract their lungs. In other words, none of them ventilate their lungs like mammals. And crocodilians don't even have blind sac lungs. But I suspect that we'll get to that in just a moment.
Now when we look at a bird has a very different way of breathing. Birds have a one-way lung system. The air goes in one way and it flows. Like a circuit, like a runner running on around the stadium. So you have a two-way lung in most cases for reptiles, and in birds you have a one-way lung.
Okay, that wasn't bad. I appreciate very much that he said in most cases.
Very different.
Very different. That might not agree with his earlier statement of in most cases. So let's finally talk about that avian lung. It's really weird. And this was the most revolutionary thing that I learned in my undergraduate zoology education. Most of the things that I learned were just details about things that I already knew to exist. I had no idea that this was going on. But as we discussed before, humans and other mammals have a blind sac lung. Well, if you're an elite mountain climber, you probably have some of the most efficient human lungs on the planet. Even so, you would probably need to bring a considerable amount of oxygen with you to climb Mount Everest. A few of the most elite mountain climbers have managed to summit Everest without oxygen. But they are moving about as slow as an upright person can move and are breathing about like this. And when they get to the top, they can say, "I am the king of the world." And how humiliating it must be in that moment to see a flock of bar-headed geese fly, which is more energetically costly than running, even at sea level, where the air is much thicker, right over your head, going honk, 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 which is just goose for ha ha ha. How is this possible? What kind of sorcery is this? Well, we first got a window into what kind of sorcery this is when a man found a goose with a severely broken wing. It had a compound fracture with the bone protruding through the skin. And he did the humane thing that anyone would do in this case. He tried to drown the goose in a barrel of water. And no matter how long he would hold its head underwater, it wouldn't drown. Later, they did similar experiments with birds with broken wings where they tied off their tracheae and they still wouldn't die. So what the heck is going on? Well, birds don't breathe like we do, or like reptiles, in most cases. I want you to do an experiment with me here in a moment. I want you to breathe as normally as possible. In a moment, I will tell you to stop breathing, and then I will give you some more instructions. Okay, so breathe normally, breathe normally, breathe normally. Stop. Okay, now exhale normally. Now exhale a little more. A little more. A little more. Okay, now just exhale as much as you can. Okay, now you can start breathing normally. What did you just find out? Did you learn that when you exhale, you still have a lot of air in your lungs? Now here's the thing. Your lungs work by getting air very close to your blood so that oxygen can move from the air to your blood via passive diffusion. This means that it is dependent on concentration gradients. Oxygen will move from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration until the concentration in your blood and the concentration in the air are the same. When you exhale normally, do you think that it's fair to conclude that you could potentially exhale the same amount a few more times without inhaling if you had to? That's certainly my observation. Which means that every time you inhale, the newly inhaled air instantly mixes with all of that air that's still in the lung. Air that has already been depleted of oxygen, and therefore you lower the difference in oxygen concentration in the air relative to the blood, and thus the amount of oxygen that can be removed before the two amounts are equal. Not to mention the fact that because the air doesn't really move in a constant direction, the blood can't move towards regions of higher oxygen concentration. In other words, your lungs are very inefficient, but at least you can run and breathe at the same time. Well, birds, they don't really breathe like this at all. When a bird inhales, the air doesn't even go to its lungs. Instead, it goes to an air sac at the rear of the bird called a posterior air sac. This isn't a lung. No gas exchange happens there. It's just a holding chamber for air. When the bird exhales, air is pushed from the air sac across the lung. But you might have noticed, not out of the body. When the bird inhales again, new air from outside is pulled into the posterior air sacs, but the air that was in the lung moves into an air sac at the front of the bird, an anterior air sac. When the bird exhales for the second time, new air moves from the posterior air sacs to the lung, but the original air that was in the anterior air sacs finally leaves the body. So air stays in the body for 2 full cycles. New air never mixes with old air, and it moves in a constant direction through the body. The fact that new air never mixes obviously keeps the concentration gradient higher, and that alone can allow more oxygen into the blood. But the fact that the air travels in a single direction is also extremely extremely important because it means that the blood can travel in the opposite direction, counter current. If they both flowed in the same direction, and let's assume for the purpose of this demonstration that these are Apollo 1 astronauts in a 100% oxygen environment, and that their blood is arriving at the lung with 0% oxygen remaining. So it would start with a 100% oxygen concentration in the air and 0% in the blood. Well, after a little bit of travel, let's say that 10% has moved from the air to the blood. So we're at 90%, 10%. And thus we still have a concentration gradient. 10% more, we're at 80-20. Still a concentration gradient. 10% more, 70-30. Then 60-40 and 50-50. But at this point, we no longer have a concentration gradient. The blood and air can travel together as long as they want, but no more than 50% of the oxygen will be able to move to the blood. However, if they flow in different directions, it works a bit differently. Let's assume the same conditions as before, 100% and 0%. And let's say that by the time the blood gets to the part of the lung where the air is entering, it's at 99% oxygen concentration. Would there still be a concentration gradient? Yeah. If 10% gets pulled out of the air, so it's only at 90%, will it ever reach blood with less than that? Of course. As it travels towards the blood with 0% oxygen, at some point it will reach blood with less than 90% oxygen in it. In fact, this will always be the case until the air reaches 0% oxygen or the blood reaches 100%. What this means is that because of the unidirectional airflow through the avian lung, they can pull potentially all of the oxygen out of the air. And combined with the fact that the deoxygenated and oxygenated air never mix, this means that the bird lung is way more efficient than your lung. So this explains how these geese can fly over Mount Everest. But how can they survive underwater or with their tracheae tied off? Well, this has more to do with the broken wing. Generally, those things would kill a bird. But because those air sacs go into the bones of the bird, the fact that they had a compound fracture protruding through the skin meant that they could literally snorkel through their bones. So unidirectional airflow is one huge difference between birds and reptiles in most cases. But what does in most cases mean? It means that this isn't a difference between birds and other reptiles in all cases. Now, if birds are actually dinosaurs, then we think that this is where they fit in the phylogenetic tree of reptiles, with their closest living relatives being crocodilians. So which group would you predict to be the case where this isn't a difference? Crocodilians? Well, you nailed it. So this is a difference between birds and reptiles, except for when it isn't. But let's see what else he has to say.
And so another thing that's interesting about the bird lungs is that a bird lung doesn't expand. So when we breathe, our lungs expand and contract because we have a diaphragm. Birds don't have that. Their lungs are kind of static. It doesn't expand at all.
Okay, that's true. Birds use their air sacs to move air into and out of the body and the lung.
All right, so if they don't expand and contract, how do they breathe?
No, birds have air sacs around the body, 9 air sacs. So you have air sacs around the body, and so you have 9 of them. And what are air sacs? Evolutionists like to look at that and say air sacs, anything that there's a space, they call it an air sac. When I'm talking about air sacs here, I'm talking about air pumps, a pump. So the lung of a bird doesn't stretch, doesn't expand that much. But you have air pumps that pump this air around that body. And that again is only unique to birds.
Well, it's not unique to just birds, because other dinosaurs, such as the Carcharodontosaurids that we covered earlier this month, they clearly had air sacs as well.
So what did the skeptics have to say about this?
So one of the things that I pointed out is that birds have a one-way lung system, while most reptiles have a two-way lung. The air goes in and out in 2 ways, bidirectional.
Except for when it doesn't.
So one of the things that skeptics will say that, hey, you talk about two-way lung system, but when you look at an alligator, which is a reptile, it has a one-way air system. The air goes in one circuit, one round, so to speak. And I would say, yes, that's true. But an alligator still have a reptilian lung.
But he just said that it doesn't. Is anybody else hearing this? What are you saying?
So remember what I say about the reptilian lung? It expands, it contracts as a diaphragm.
Except the crocodilian is the only reptile with a diaphragm. He was just wrong about that. But go on.
An alligator has that. The only difference is that the air goes in one direction now. And you see, another thing that's interesting in alligator is that they have in the bottom or the back of the belly, they have like an air container, an air. Evolutionists will call it air sacs.
Seems like a reasonable term for it.
But this is not an air pump, it's just an air storage. And this is helpful for an alligator because when an alligator is underwater, it doesn't breathe. That allows the air storage for it to continue breathing.
I guess meaning that unidirectional airflow has nothing to do with whether or not it is a reptilian lung? Yes, it ventilates its lung differently from a bird, but also differently from all of the other reptiles. So how is that a reptilian lung if the bird lung is not? It isn't exactly a bird lung, but it is a heck of a lot more like a bird lung than it is like that of any other reptile.
But an alligator has a reptilian lung, which is very different. Expand, contract, different from what we find in birds.
Yes, it is different from a bird lung, but not as much different as it is from the lungs of other reptiles. So it certainly isn't a generic reptile lung. Gosh, the group of extant animals that we think is most closely related to birds has a lung that is most similar to birds. Therefore, it's a reptile lung because they ventilate that lung in a way unlike that of any other reptiles, including birds. But I'm gonna call it a reptile lung anyway. Just sort of like that dang bird tail on Archaeopteryx. You know, the one that looks nothing like a bird tail, but basically exactly like the tail of other maniraptoran dinosaurs. You know, that bird tail. Or the way that birds aren't dinosaurs because dinosaurs have a perforated acetabulum, and the only animals alive today with a perforated acetabulum like that are birds. This is a train wreck. Honestly, if I was looking to make the case for birds being dinosaurs, this seems like a great way to start. But let's see what else he has for us.
Are there any other differences?
I am, again, so glad that she's asking this question because so far, all we have is that birds ventilate their lungs differently. Again, I'm not making the case that birds are not a unique group of dinosaurs and reptiles with no unique features of their own. But so far, I would say that the evidence he has provided has demonstrated that birds are likely part of these groups and not something wholly unrelated. Just so you know, every time we make one of these videos, we make an entire extra video just for our Stinkin' Rad fans at Patreon. And I gotta tell you, the ones in reaction to the Creationist videos are usually some of the most watched and most enjoyed of them all. Probably the most of all time, actually. So if you'd like to see the extra video we have for our Stinkin' Rad fans, please consider checking out our Patreon.
Another thing that is unique to birds is that they have pneumatic bones.
That is true, except in the skulls of crocodilians and all sorts of dinosaurs.
So what do you mean by pneumatic bones? Well, most evolutionists will talk about hollow bones. But actually, almost every bone in our body is hollow except for our ear bones. You see, bones can be filled with marrow, bones can be filled with blood and other things. But when we talk about pneumatic bones, we're not just talking about hollow bones with air, we're talking about air passages.
That's great. But that's something that is super duper common in dinosaurs.
So earlier on, we mentioned that there are air sacs, and it pumps the air. The pneumatic bones, that are air passages, is part of the way it breathes. The air flows through that, and it's important for things like heat regulation. And that is unique to birds.
And dinosaurs. But it is key in birds because sweating doesn't work well if you need to be light, and soaked feathers also don't work very well. So it's important in birds, but not unique to birds.
Okay, so Dawn, we have already mentioned the way it breathes, the one-way lung system with the air sacs, which is unique to birds. We have talked about the pneumatic bones, which are linked up to the way it breathes in the lungs. But there's another thing.
That's good, because none of those things are unique to birds. Many of them are commonalities with other reptiles alive today, and all of them are present in other dinosaurs, especially Maniraptora, including the hollow bones with air sacs and passages, and the way that they ventilated their lungs. Dr. Grant knew this in 1993. This isn't new information.
Now look at the half-moon-shaped bones on the wrists. No wonder these guys learn how to fly. No, seriously. All right. Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles.
Look at the pubic bone, turned backward, just like a bird. Look at the vertebrae, full of air sacs and hollows, just like a bird.
And even the word raptor means bird of prey.
That was more than 30 years ago. The word dinosaur is less than 200 years old, but we have known that they had air sacs since 1870. And nobody at that time was claiming that birds were dinosaurs. They just had them. But so far, he hasn't been able to explain a single bird-only feature. And the only dinosaur-only feature that he has referenced is one that birds have also. But let's see what else he has.
We can look at the femur, the thigh of a bird. Sometimes if you look at a bird, you must be wondering, hey, why does a bird have a knee that bends in the opposite direction? Have you ever thought about that?
Right. That looks kind of weird.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, but that's not its knee. That's actually the ankle. You see, the knee of a bird is actually much higher up in its body. And the thigh in birds is actually pretty much inside the torso of a bird. It is horizontal, it's rigid, it doesn't swing much. There are lots of connective tissue that hold it in place. So the next time you buy a rotisserie chicken from the supermarket, cut into the thigh, extract the thigh out. You need to cut into the torso or the body of the chicken to extract the thigh, because most birds, their thighs are partially within the torso of a bird. Why is that? Because earlier on I mentioned the pneumatic bones. The pneumatic bones are found inside the thigh as well. In other words, the thighs are part of the way it breathes. See, in dinosaurs, how are dinosaurs' legs like? Well, we know, right? Jurassic Park, their legs are like us. The thighs are outside the body, they're external. When they run, they swing their thighs, their thigh bone.
Okay, now we're talking, because this is a way that modern birds are different from most Mesozoic dinosaurs. Though not if you want Archaeopteryx to be a bird. It has the same problem with its legs that it has with its tail. But if you're only talking about modern birds, almost all modern birds do hold their legs like this. Much more forward than did non-avian dinosaurs. Now, why? Why would the leg position of a modern bird be more forward than that of other theropods, including birds like Archaeopteryx? Well, let's look at the center of balance for a typical Maniraptoran. You have a head, torso, and huge arms compared to a Tyrannosaur, but pretty normally sized arms for a biped, with modest musculature. And offsetting all of that weight up front, a large tail. Archaeopteryx was still built pretty much like this. So the center of mass would be about here. But if you modify that body for flight, if you expand the size of the forelimbs, as well as dramatically increase the size of the associated musculature, and at the same time shrink the tail, what happens to the center of mass? So what would you predict to happen to the limb position as these changes occurred? And what if I told you that they were becoming less reliant on bipedal locomotion and stride length at the same time? So yes, that is a difference, but is it a surprising difference? And does it actually apply to all of the animals that he considers to be birds?
If evolution was true, how could they run like that without interfering with their breathing?
Yeah, I don't think it can, because if that's a bird and they swing their thighs like that, that would tear the entire lung system apart.
Okay, so we have an organism that has been moving towards this leg positioning over the last 150 or more million years. And now here we are asking what would happen if we forced it to move in a way that its lineage has not moved for most of that time. Yeah, it probably wouldn't go well. But we don't think that the other dinosaurs evolved from birds. So the question isn't how could other dinosaurs have moved bird legs like that? The question is, could other dinosaur legs become like bird legs over 150 plus million years? Yeah, I mean, why not? Again, it is a difference between birds and other dinosaurs, but it's also something that doesn't apply to all of the things that he considers to be birds. So what does that mean?
So here we have what I call the integrated biological systems. We have three very complex biological systems that are all linked up together. How do you evolve from one to another?
Again, It might be hard to go from the bird leg position to the more traditional dinosaur position, which would explain why things like ostriches still do not swing their femora very much. But moving your legs forward as you become more front heavy, that isn't a very difficult thing for evolution to explain. And gosh, look what happens to the stride of a chicken as soon as you add a counterbalanced tail.
And in fact, if they're so different, why are we even grouping them together as if they are the same thing?
Well, I'd say because the only difference that he's given so far is their leg position. And that is a leg position that not all birds have. It sounds like birds are just crouching dinosaurs that haven't always crouched.
All right, Joel, you've mentioned a lot of biological differences between a dinosaur and a bird, but why does any of this matter as far as whether or not a dinosaur could evolve into a bird?
Okay, assuming that you have taken everything else that he has said at face value, that seems like a fair question. Just because birds are unique from other dinosaurs, how does that preclude the possibility that birds are one of many such dinosaur groups?
Well, first of all, if there are feathered dinosaurs, that would not really be an issue for the creation model.
Great. I think that was sort of my point from the beginning. Why is it a problem if birds are one of the many groups of feathered dinosaurs?
Because God could have created feathered dinosaurs. He could have created land creatures with feathers. So that's not really an issue for us. But most evolutionists believe that dinosaurs evolved into modern-day birds. And if that is the case, then feathers must have appeared somewhere along the way.
Indeed.
So all these years, evolutionists have appealed to feathered dinosaurs as the best evidence for bird evolution. If we don't have feathered dinosaurs, everything just collapses.
Fair point. Of course, I would love to know what he thinks is the clear distinction between a feathered dinosaur and a bird, given that Archaeopteryx, despite its limb position and long tail, is apparently a bird and not a dinosaur.
So then, what scientific evidence do evolutionists point to say that dinosaurs did evolve into birds?
This is a really good question. Honestly, he has already mentioned several great pieces of evidence, but he has either denied their existence or just kind of hand-waved them away. Clearly the tail of a bird. I mean, it's obvious. But credit her for asking him to steelman his opposition. In this way, you can demonstrate whether you disagree out of ignorance to the arguments of your opposition, or if you disagree despite a correct understanding of their positions. The latter being far more persuasive than the former.
Well, this goes back to the 1970s. So there was a scientist, John Ostrom. John Ostrom believed that Deinonychus, or a similar-like creature, evolved into the modern birds that we see today. So Deinonychus, what's that? Well, if you watch my favorite movie, Jurassic Park, you know, Velociraptor, right? That isn't really Velociraptor. So when the makers of the movie made that, they made Deinonychus. That's the one we're familiar with. And they named it after the smaller cousin, Velociraptor.
Thank you! That is the truest thing that we have heard all day.
See, the Velociraptor is about the size of a large dog. And so they made Deinonychus, but they said Deinonychus, it sounds really boring. So they made Deinonychus and named it after the smaller cousin, Velociraptor. So picture Deinonychus in your mind, that creature that in Jurassic Park was known as Velociraptor. Of course, now in modern museums, they put feathers on that creature. So that was in the 1970s. Now when we get to 1996, there's a key discovery here. They found this dinosaur called Ceratosaurus. So what's that? This is a dinosaur, not a bird. And we know that because on this fossil itself, in its belly, there is actually a dark patch on the fossil. And we know that's its liver. And because of the placement of the liver and the way it interacts with the diaphragm, we know that this bird had a reptilian lung. This is a dinosaur, not a bird.
Okay, so we know from the placement of its liver that Sinosauropteryx was a dinosaur, but it apparently ventilated its lung using a diaphragm to move its liver, like a crocodilian, which he calls a reptile lung, though no other reptiles do this. But we do agree that Sinosauropteryx was a dinosaur. So, does it have any bird-only features?
But what is interesting is that in this creature, on the fossil, on the back of its head to the tail, we see a very fuzzy tuft that looks like fur or like hair. So evolutionists point to that and they say, hey, look, that's evidence of feathered dinosaur. But we look at that and we say, no, that's more like collagen, decayed skin collagen.
So what is this collagen that you're talking about? I know I need more collagen, but what is it in dinosaurs?
That's right. So we know collagen from the supplements that people eat. But collagen is just a very common structural protein. So in our body, collagen will make up maybe 20 to 30% of the proteins that we have today. It's a tough, fibrous protein that gives strength to our body parts. And collagen, when it breaks down, when it decays, it can take on many forms. So it's fibrous. So there are maybe 4 or 5 major forms of collagen, some say more. But what is interesting is this. The dinosaur fuzziness, which evolutionists claim are proto-feathers, on its way to evolving to real feathers, they really resemble the 4 or 5 forms of collagen, of decayed skin collagen.
And all that shows up in a fossil?
Yeah, sometimes you can see that on the fossil itself. And sometimes these collagen fibers even appear under the scales of the dinosaur, which tells you they cannot be feathers. Those are just decayed skin.
Okay, so he's claiming here that the supposed feathers on the dinosaur Sinosauropteryx, that's just collagen. Okay, so let's take a look at Sinosauropteryx, which was roughly a meter-long compsognathid that lived in China in the early Cretaceous. And this would be millions of years after the first birds, so this wouldn't be a direct ancestor of birds. But being a compsognathid, it was the most distantly related dinosaur to birds that we ever found with evidence of feathers, at least at the time of this discovery. And these are the filaments that we take as feather-like structures. But it is true that there was some controversy about what they really were. And collagen fibers were one of the possible explanations put forward by Alan Fiducia before he had an opportunity to actually examine the specimen himself. However, subsequent studies comparing them to known cases of collagen fibers forming a shadow like this, as well as to the feathers of birds found in the same formation, have revealed that these clearly are not collagen fibers. We even know what color and pattern they had because of these feather-like filaments, and collagen fibers do not hold pigment like this. And while that might be a good explanation for a lone specimen with structures resembling feathers, we have multiple such specimens. So it isn't collagen. But it is hard to make out much of the detail in a fossil. Well, I mean, unless it's trapped in amber. This is the tail of a theropod that we found trapped in amber. So this isn't some permineralized rock in place of the structures. These are the structures. What do those look like to you?
So are there evolutionists who agree with your assessment that what appears to just be dinosaur fuzz is just collagen?
Well, most evolutionists believe that birds are dinosaurs, but there are a few exceptions, and one exception to that is Professor Alan Fiducia. So who is he? Well, he's a bird expert, a professor emeritus, but he doesn't believe that the theropod dinosaurs evolved into birds. But he's an evolutionist, so he believes that the birds actually derived or they evolved from a much earlier line of reptilian creatures called archosaur. And the reason why, because he looks at the anatomy and he says that no, dinosaurs, the theropod dinosaurs, they have the wrong kind of anatomy to even call them birds.
Okay. So in response to the question of essentially, do any actual scientists agree with your assessment that the feathers of Sinosauropteryx are actually just collagen, he cites only Alan Fiducia, who made this claim without actually examining the fossils. But he then goes on to answer a different question altogether. He doesn't talk about Alan Fiducia's current position on the feathers of Sinosauropteryx. He just says that Alan Fiducia is basically the only paleontologist on Earth who thinks that birds are not dinosaurs. And he still thinks that they're archosaurs. And just for the record, Archosauria is a big group that includes crocodilians and dinosaurs, as well as other closely related groups like pterosaurs. So I'm not sure how thinking that birds are super close relatives of dinosaurs is much better than thinking that they are dinosaurs when it comes to the position of creationists. And I still don't know why this is a battle that they care about having. But here we are.
But you see, evolutionists have, after all these years, they've always been promoting the idea that the dinosaurs evolved into the modern birds that we see today. They say birds are dinosaurs. If there are no feathered dinosaurs, that's a huge problem for them. Because you see, in their model, if the dinosaurs evolved into the modern birds, then somewhere along the way, you must have evolved feathers. So where's the evidence for that? So this is a huge problem for the dinosaur to bird evolution model.
Is it though? Because he only discussed one example, other than Archaeopteryx, of a feathered dinosaur. And then he claimed that the feathers weren't feathers and cited an explanation that was tested and turned out to be false. But there are many more examples of feathered dinosaurs than that. Far, far more. So I just hope we're not done with this topic just yet.
What would we expect to see if there had been feathered dinosaurs, or if dinosaurs had evolved into birds?
Obviously, it would be nice if this interviewer could fact-check this guy, but given that she is taking his answers at face value, I think she's doing a really good job of pressing him to actually answer her questions. And this is a really good question. If you don't know what evidence for bird evolution from dinosaurs would look like if it existed, then how do you even know if it does or does not exist?
That's an excellent question. So earlier on, I mentioned that in the fossil record, that there are real birds with feathers. Archaeopteryx, for example, that is a bird that's not a dinosaur. Microraptor is another example of that. Confuciusornis is another one. So there are real birds in the fossil record. And those are the ones with real feathers. At the same time, we have dinosaurs, not birds, dinosaurs, that has fuzzy structure, which we say look exactly like skin collagen. They are decayed.
Okay, so now in addition to Archaeopteryx, we now have Microraptor and Confuciusornis as examples of other things that he is considering to be birds, but not dinosaurs, and those all have real feathers. And he's saying that there are dinosaurs with fuzzy structures that he says look exactly like collagen, even though that has turned out to not be the case when examined carefully and compared to actual fossilized collagen and feathers. And this, what you're seeing right here, is kind of the definition of pseudoscience. He is taking the explanations that fit his conclusion and ignoring all of those that reject it.
So evolutionists take these two groups and they lump them together as feathered dinosaurs. So how should we think about that? Well, I would like to propose a way of thinking about that. If you look at the birds, we need to identify what are the bird-only characteristics, things that are unique to birds. So we have already covered some of that. We have looked at the hip socket, we have looked at the tail, the way it's configured, we have looked at the lungs, we looked at the pneumatic bones, and we look at the internal thigh. Unique to birds. So we call that on one end the zone 3, bird-only features.
Okay, so he says we need to look at the bird-only characteristics, and that's totally fair, though we probably need to look even more at the dinosaur-only characteristics to see if they apply to birds, as we're proposing that all birds are dinosaurs and not that all dinosaurs are birds. So what are they? He listed the hip socket, and that's clearly not a bird-only characteristic. That is a dinosaur characteristic that birds share. We have to look at the tail, which is very different from a dinosaur tail in modern birds. But birds like Archaeopteryx and Microraptor had a totally different tail. Very much like, you guessed it, theropod dinosaurs. But at least Confuciusornis, it had a proper bird tail. The lungs, we need to look at the lungs, which are more like those of a crocodilian than crocodilian lungs are like those of any other reptile. And of course their lungs are way more like those of other dinosaurs than they are even like those of a crocodilian. We need to look at the pneumatic bones, which are widely observed in dinosaurs, and the internal thigh, the only feature here that is found in birds but not found widely in other dinosaurs. But that is because the center of balance in most other dinosaurs was not as far forward as that of modern birds, which is why it isn't found in birds like Archaeopteryx or Microraptor either. So the only bird-only feature is that thigh, and it isn't totally bird-only or found in all birds. And the birds that don't have it are configured like other theropod dinosaurs.
On the left side, if you draw two overlapping circles on the left side, you have the dinosaur-only features. So dinosaur-only on one side, on one circle. On the right side, another circle, bird-only features. If you let them overlap, in the middle part, if it is true that there are feathered dinosaurs, we should find many examples, not one or two, many examples of creatures that have bird-only and dinosaur-only features, all in one creature.
Okay, so he is not going to be happy with one or two examples of creatures with bird-only and dinosaur-only features all in one creature. But he has already given us 3. Archaeopteryx, Microraptor, and Confuciusornis. And I will go into greater detail about these three, especially about the two new ones, if he doesn't do it for me first. There are more than these three examples, but he has volunteered these three, and that's not one or two.
Creatures that have bird-only and dinosaur-only features all in one creature. And we don't find any of that.
We don't?
So earlier on, I did mention that evolutionists take these real feathers in real flag birds and they conflate them with the dinosaur that has a fuzzy structure. And they conflate them together as one. And that's unfortunate because when you do an analysis of these creatures, your result is only as good as the information that goes in. So we say garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, who is this we? Even Alan Fiducia would not be on board with pretty much anything he has had to say. And that was the only scientist in the world that he claimed would agree with him about anything. I don't know who we are.
So in that model, if you conflate both of these together, guess what will happen in the end? At the end of the day, when you get your final results out, they will say that, hey, look, there's feathered dinosaurs. But that's because you have wrong data or bad data that's going in there. So when we say that it's decades collagen in dinosaur fossils, to be honest, it doesn't seem very convincing. But then when you look at these actual fossils under the fossil record, that changes everything. So why do I say that? So earlier on, I mentioned the professor Alan Fiducia. So he said that this is just decayed skin collagen.
Now, again, he proposed that explanation without examining the fossils and before a detailed analysis had been conducted. And just in one instance, not in all of the instances. So, might be misrepresenting him a little.
How did he come to that conclusion? Well, Alan Fiducia and another very famous scientist, Tiergarten Solayalingam, so they just call him Professor Solly. So this second guy, Professor Solly, he just passed away 1 or 2 years ago. Who is he? He's an expert on skin tissue, skin, hair, feathers, and things like that. His whole career is based on that. He actually wrote 2 postgraduate volumes, textbooks, teaching people about this very thing. And so they came together and they worked on this. And what they did is that he took carcasses of sharks, dolphins, whales, placed them under the ground, buried them for 1 year. And after 1 year, he opened up and looked at their decaying carcasses. Guess what he found?
What did he find?
He found the exact same fuzzy structures forming. They are identical and cannot be distinguished from the so-called dinosaur fuzz.
Okay, at a cursory glance, it cannot, but under closer examination, it not only can be distinguished, but has been distinguished.
And then he looked at extinct fossils of marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs, mosasaurs, and these are creatures that swim in the ocean. They don't have feathers. And found the exact same structures being preserved on their fossil itself.
Okay, yes, he did. And the fact that those of Sinosauropteryx did not match those fossils, but did match those of fossilized birds, was how they concluded that they are feathers and not collagen fibers.
So that's confirmation that this is not collagen fibers, this is just skin tissue. And so when you look at this dinosaur fossil, it looks like he has something fuzzy there. Yes, it does. But hey, look at the decaying dolphin carcass. The same wavy structure that you see there. Hey, look at that. That looks like it's a frayed tissue. Yeah, it looks a bit like feathers. Yeah, it does. But wait, look at the decayed dolphin. You get exact same things.
Similar, yes. Exactly the same, no.
So what I'm hearing from you, Joel, is overwhelming evidence that dinosaurs could not have evolved with feathers. Is that right?
No, that's not right. Even if all of the things that he said were true, and they certainly are not, none of that would have anything to do with whether or not dinosaurs could evolve feathers. If it was all true, it would mean that we don't have evidence of feathers in dinosaurs. But again, this is not even close to the case. He is either very ignorant, which I doubt given that he has shown some expertise in many areas, or he is being very, very dishonest. And so far, that's my honest opinion.
That's exactly the case. So we have 2 very clear groups. One, that are flight creatures with real flight feathers, and the other ones that are reptilian dinosaur creatures that has this fuzzy structure.
Again, even if that were true, that we have birds that are clearly distinct from dinosaurs, that had feathers and dinosaurs that did not, that would still not be evidence that dinosaurs could not have evolved feathers. It would only be evidence that we have no evidence that they did. But again, that isn't the case. And I'll talk a little bit more about his 3 examples and maybe a few more here in a minute if he doesn't get to it first.
So I mentioned Tiergarten who did these experiments. Skeptics, they come along. So they say, oh no, those pictures that you produce from these marine fossils, say, oh, that's not collagen fibers. Because on these fossils, they look like they're little channels, and say those channels are not collagen fibers in there. They say that this must have been caused by a pneumatic pen. You see, when you prepare a fossil, you use a special pen. They say, oh, look, those are actually scratch marks in the fossil.
Okay, so this at least shows that he is aware of the follow-up studies that were done. So I don't think this is ignorance.
That doesn't hold up. Do you know why?
No.
Some of these fossils under the microscope, you can even see the details. It's very well preserved. Like I say, they are under the scale sometimes. And these are raised 3-dimensional shape. The long fiber structure, this is part of the fossil itself. It's not a scratch mark.
That's funny because that's not the conclusion that the actual researchers who performed the study reached. So I'm curious where he's getting his information, but whatever.
Under the microscope, then, would feathers look different than collagen?
Exactly, because when we look at a feather, you have a central barb and you have all these barbules at the side. We know what a feather looks like. And when we look at these other structures, they look heavy structures. And like I say, there are many forms of decayed collagen. But when we look at these decaying dinosaur fossils, we see all the same 4 or 5 forms of so-called dinosaur fuzz that are identical in every way. So Tiergarten, the scientist I mentioned earlier on, he said this, he's convinced that people who reject the idea that those are collagen fibers, he's convinced that those people have never actually really studied what real collagen look like.
Joel, that was great information that you shared with us, but it's hard to hear anything about dinosaurs in our secular world that doesn't directly link it to millions of years and evolution. So as a parent hearing this for the first time, what's the important thing to really remember about all this information you've shared?
Well, so just to give a quick summary of what we have looked at. So we have looked at anatomy, the hip socket, the tail of dinosaur and birds are very different. We've looked at the lungs, the pneumatic bones, and the thigh. These are integrated biological systems. They're all linked to one. Birds are very different from reptiles. And then we saw the collagen fibers on the dinosaur body. Those are not feathers. So finally, we see 2 overlapping circles, bird only on one side, dinosaur only on one side, and we show in the center that if it is true that there are feathered dinosaurs, we should find many individuals with bird-only and dinosaur-only features in a single creature, and we don't have a single one. And since birds and dinosaurs are so different, I mean, look at the way the whole body is built. If it's so different, it doesn't make sense for you to group these creatures together.
Okay, so in summary, we're supposed to look at the anatomy, the hip socket, the tail, the lungs, pneumatic bones, the thigh, and the studies of collagen fibers, and we're supposed to conclude that birds are very different from reptiles. He says that we should find many individuals with bird-only and dinosaur-only features in a single creature, and we don't have a single one. And because they're so different, it doesn't make sense to group these creatures together. But if it turns out that birds have the dinosaur hip socket, and in some cases the tail of dinosaurs, and if dinosaurs had a nearly identical lung and pneumatic bones like birds, as well as feathers, and basically everything but the crouched position that only makes sense for an organism with its weight positioned forward, what should we conclude then? I'm not even bringing up the other lines of evidence outside of what he has brought up on his own accord. What should our conclusion be? He says that we should find many individuals with bird-only and dinosaur-only features in a single creature, and we don't have a single one. So let's look at his 3, just for a second. Archaeopteryx, Microraptor, and Confuciusornis. All 3 of these are, by his own admission, birds. So they should have many bird-like features, or else I really don't know what's going on. And since we don't have a single individual with bird-only and dinosaur-only features, they shouldn't have any features that are odd for birds, but normal for dinosaurs. Like, oh, I don't know, a long tail and a free-swinging femur. But you already know that Archaeopteryx has both of those things. And so does Microraptor. Though Confuciusornis had a pygostyle and a femoral position more like that of modern birds than did the other two. It also had a beak, which makes sense for a bird. Of course, the other two had teeth. There are birds with serrated beaks today, but not dinosaur teeth. And all three of them had 3 independently moving clawed fingers. Don't see that in any modern birds. I mean, to be perfectly honest, that seems like 3 separate genera of organisms with bird-only and dinosaur-only features. And those are just the examples that he brought up. We won't even talk about the quill knobs on Velociraptor, though we do have a whole video on it, in case you're into that kind of thing. And this doesn't prove that birds came from dinosaurs, but it certainly does prove that this guy is full of hooey. But I'll let him finish up and you can draw your own conclusion.
This should help encourage people to know that we don't have to just take for granted what's put before us as evolution is fact and dinosaurs lived millions of years ago. That maybe what the Bible has to say is actually the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can just lie about all the evidence. And little known fact, you don't have to lie to accept the Bible as truth. I love the Bible, and I think this guy is a total charlatan. It is possible to believe in God and accept the evidence that birds are the descendants of dinosaurs. Heck, it's possible to be a young Earth creationist and consider birds to be a type of dinosaur. Of course, I've never seen one try.
That's right, because I think dinosaurs have been used as a gateway to introduce evolution to many kids. You know, I go to talks, kids will come up to me. They say, hey, look, chickens are dinosaurs. No, it isn't. Okay, we don't have to be afraid of dinosaurs, because when we train ourselves in this area, we can use this as a way to reach out to our kids and our families and show them, hey, look, dinosaurs actually show what the Bible says very well. It doesn't prove evolution at all. There are no feathered dinosaurs. And remember, if there's no feathered dinosaurs, there's no evolution there.
So this kind of solid, scientific, evidence-based information is not readily available in many places. But where could someone who wanted to know more about it go?
One place I would recommend going is check out the book that I co-authored with Dr. Jonathan Safety. It's called Titans. And we have more than 2 chapters that address this whole issue of whether birds are dinosaurs. Another place you can go to is creation.com. That's our website. Thousands of articles on this. And check out Creation Magazine. So in Creation Magazine, in almost every issue, it's a quarterly magazine, we always have an issue that talks about dinosaurs. So this is a place that you can use to equip yourself to reach out to your families.
So now you know where to go to get information like this. That was something. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. And happy Dinosaur December. And I just want to thank all of these people for making this video possible. Whenever we make a video that's a little bit different for us, it's kind of a gamble, but because of them, we always get to try new things. Stop. Okay, now exhale normally. Now exhale a little more. Okay, now you can start breathing normally. What did you just find out? We should pause for a second. Give it a go.
I did. I did too.
What'd you learn?
That there was more to give.
All right. Sorry, I got so lightheaded from hyperventilating I couldn't even see for a while there. Okay. Wee.
You good?
Yeah. I was like, might pass out.
I was excited to see you like face plant
Into the computer. Video starts playing again. Okay. Listen to how many times Will just exhaled without inhaling. Well, there was likely a soft tissue membrane between them. If you look at just the bones, the 2 femoral heads can look at one another through the perforated acetabulum.
That's the first time I finally understood what you've meant, and we've been doing these videos forever and editing and all that. I'm like, what am I looking at? I don't understand where the all is.